Hello, welcome to another episode of Transformation Tuesday. Tonight's episode is all about business success, but specifically, how do we create more business success through understanding relationships? I've had a lot of experience with relationships. Obviously, my coaching is built around relationships, and I would like to share with you my learnings, what I believe are the most important considerations around business success. And relationships are the key. Relationships are always the key. We always have a relationship with the person that we are doing business with, and the strength of that relationship to a large degree will determine the longevity and the success of that business partnership. So I'm going to be sharing with you tonight, how do you deepen your relationships? How do you cultivate relationships in business? How do we understand the nature of relationships so that business takes place far more easily and effortlessly, which then translates to how do you earn more money? How do you have a greater level of trust? How do you have a greater sense of confidence in either the service or the product or the business that you are operating inside of? And relationships are incredibly important, not just in business, but in every dimension of life. But tonight, I'm going to be exploring business relationships and why they're important. Hello, Monica. How are you? Good to have you back. So, relationships in business are key, because if we don't have a really, really strong relationship with the person that we are trusting to deliver a product or service, then that's going to undermine the whole service. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, if we are in a business relationship and you don't trust the person that is delivering the service, if you don't have a sense of trust, if you don't believe in their competency, if you don't believe in their willingness to serve you, to help you, to hold space for you, to answer questions, to hold space, to be ultimately someone who's going to have your highest interests at heart, then it's very difficult to be in business with that person. So you've only got to take a look at what's important for you when you look at buying a car or buying a house or purchasing any service. You look at the things that are important to you, and you want to have a level of trust in the person who's delivering the service. So I would suggest that trust is a major pillar that is the key consideration of every relationship. It's you want to trust the person that you're in business with, and you want the people that you're doing business with to trust you. So really the question here becomes, well, how do we develop a relationship where someone trusts us? Now, first of all, I think we need to develop what is the definition of trust. Well, I'm going to suggest that the definition of trust in a business relationship is when your customers or your clients know or have a really significant degree of certainty that you are going to hold their highest interests in the highest regard. Another way of saying that is that they trust you to capitalize on their best interests. They trust you to put their interests ahead of your own. And I think that is a great way to do business, which is a philosophy of you are there to serve, and if that means telling your client or telling your customer that they should shop elsewhere, they should go elsewhere to get a better product that's more suited to them, then that's what you do. And when you have a willingness to serve your customers and serve your clients and give them the advice, the truth, this is what it's about. It's about sharing with them the truth that they need to hear. That's what it's about. And when you're pursuing the principle of truth, what you're doing is you're standing up for your clients, you're standing up for your customers, you're standing up for the people you're serving. And there is no higher principle in this reality than the principle of truth. So if you're pointing them to the truth, it's generally pretty easy. It's generally pretty easy. So if your service happens to be the most qualified, the most relevant, the most impactful, and the most in alignment with what they're looking for, well, it's pretty easy to point to that. You don't have to do a lot of convincing. You don't have to do a lot of persuasion. You just have to point to the truth, and the truth will be witnessed. And that's what business is about. It's about you pointing to the truth and being willing to confront the truth no matter where it leads. And so there's plenty of clients that I have worked with, or people that have come to me, for example, and wanted to work with me, and I've told them that I don't think we're a match. They're better off going somewhere else to get what they need, because they're either going to be overpaying, or what they're looking for is not quite what I'm going to deliver. And so my philosophy is I would rather point them to where they're going to get a greater quality of service rather than take someone on that I know that I'm going to undeliver a quality product. Now, when you trust yourself to be able to stand by that philosophy, to stand by that principle, business becomes really, really easy. And what happens is you start developing relationships based upon trust, because people will come to you and they will seek your advice, and you will become like a trusted advisor. And business will happen as a consequence of their relationship thriving. Business will happen as a consequence of that relationship thriving. And so sales, revenue, business deals, all of that happens as a consequence, as a result of someone trusting you. So that trust needs to be established. Otherwise, the whole business relationship will be in jeopardy. It will be undermined. And that's one thing I think is really, really important for every service provider, is for them to be willing to pursue truth and willing to point to the truth and willing to recommend advice, even when it means recommending that they go elsewhere, not buying their products. And I think that is I think that holds people in high regard, and it develops a lot of trust, to the point where I've had an experience where I've told multiple people that I recommend that they do another training, or they go somewhere else, or they hire another coach, or they do something else just because it wasn't a fit. And then they've later come back and they've recommended clients to work with me. Now, they haven't necessarily personally worked with me, but they've recommended me. Why? Because they trusted me, because I stood up for their highest interest and I was willing to share with them what they needed to know, even though it wasn't necessarily in my favor. But ultimately, it is in your favor, and it is in my favor, because whenever we're abiding by the principles of integrity and truth, well, that's always the best way to do business. So it's all about relationships. Now, in addition to trust, what is also required is actually creating a sense of, in your client that, or your customers, that you care about them. Now, this is related to trust, but this is also going above and beyond. This is actually putting yourself in their shoes and saying, well, imagine that you've already started working with them. Imagine they already are a customer. Imagine that they've already started to become a paying client. How would you treat them if they were already a paying client? And that's the philosophy that I adopt, is before anyone's even interacted with me, I just assume that they're a paying client. Not from the perspective I don't expect them to work with me, but that's how I treat them, in terms of I'm already going to be serving them to the highest capacity. I'm already going to be sharing with them what they need to know, regardless of whether they're paying me. Right? Because I don't need someone to be paying me in order for me to be caring about them, in order for me to share what they need to hear. So I'm going to suggest caring about everyone like they're already a paying client is a great way to establish really, really strong relationships. So the care factor, which is a deep attitude of wanting to contribute to someone else for no other reason than because it's a good thing. And I'm a firm believer that what goes around comes around. What that means is, if you constantly care enough about people and constantly share enough value with them, well, eventually you're going to get rewarded for that. We live in a universe where if you constantly add value, if you add so much value, well, people are going to reward you for that. People are going to come back and they are going to want to do business with you. So there's a function of trust and caring about people. That's fundamentally what it comes down to. If you care about people, well, they sense that, they feel it. And in today's age, when things are getting faster, when technology is getting a bit crazy, in a world where we're moving to a lot of online virtual realities, the world of having someone actually care for you and actually take the time to notice you and pay attention to you, that is really, really valuable. So to actually take the time to care for someone, that's a thing that gets really, really gets noticed incredibly in the space of a business relationship. Now, in addition to trust and care, what you also want to build is you want to build rapport. You want to build a deep sense of connection with someone. Now, rapport is probably more of a surface level description. What we're talking about here is a deep connection with someone, a connection that goes beyond the physical, a connection where you have a sense of that you're in this person's life for a reason, and that there's a reason why you're interacting with this person to actually serve them to a higher capacity. So I'm going to suggest connection and service are one of the highest virtues, another one of the highest principles that you can strive for in business, is actually wanting to be of service. Now, I think it's important for us to create the distinction here of not being of service at the expense of ourselves, or sacrificing ourselves, but being of service through ourselves, serving ourselves to a higher capacity so that we can be of service to others once we have connected to the reason why that's important to us. So it's not being subservient to others, it's not being wanting to please others, it's us caring about what we do and us being so aligned with the service we're providing that by us being of service, well, that's just an extension of what we are. That's just an extension of who we are. And we're simply allowing our authentic expression to pour through us. Now, if you're in a business or if you're in a career where you feel like you're out of alignment, if you feel like you're in a relationship that's out of alignment, well, I think that's a major clue, because a lot of people are in jobs or businesses or in business partnerships where they probably don't resonate with it. Now, let me know if you've ever been in a business relationship or a relationship or a career or a job, anything to do with business, and you've been in a relationship where it just wasn't in alignment. It just wasn't in alignment. Now, there's a number of reasons for that. Now, it's not to say that it's right or wrong, but there's a major clue there. If a relationship feels like it's out of alignment, well, something has shifted in the relationship. Something has happened in that relationship that needs to be attended to before the business continues. Because if your business relationship continues beyond that space where nothing changes, well, you can't deliver service to the highest capacity because the relationship is fractured. If there's an element of trust that's been fractured or that is missing, well, that's going to diminish the relationship. That's going to diminish the amount of value that can be exchanged, and it's not going to be of service to the people inside the relationship. So the business that's going to get expressed, or the business results themselves, are going to suffer. So good to know. The relationship is the most important thing. Now, I've had experiences before where client relationships start to maybe deteriorate a little bit. Maybe a client starts maybe not quite turning up to sessions on time, or a client maybe starts to make excuses. And those sorts of things need to get corrected. Those sorts of things need to get addressed. They need to get spoken into. And so this is where the next virtue I'm going to suggest that strengthens relationships is courage and vulnerability, which is having the courage to address and identify and acknowledge gaps in the relationship where things are not working. So if there have been promises that haven't been kept, if there's been obligations that have been neglected, if there have been things that have been said that have been egoic or judgmental or harsh or nasty or dismissive or diminishing, well, those are the types of things that need to get addressed, because otherwise, if you don't address those things inside the relationship, well, how we get treated is ultimately how we're teaching someone else to treat us. So how the person in that relationship is treating you is going to be determined by how you're showing up and what you allow inside that space. So it comes down to the boundaries that you're expressing and that you're setting up in that relationship, such that we become very, very clear on, well, what is this relationship? What is it based upon? What is it that we as service providers are going to give, and what is the expectation that the client or the customer is going to be responsible for? And this all needs to get clarified. This is very, very important to clarify these sorts of things up front at the beginning of a business relationship, whether it be signing a contract or an agreement, or at least just having some sort of conversation at the beginning before any relationship starts, to identify what are the potential go-wrongs. What are the potential scenarios that might unfold that are going to cause conflict? What are the things that need to be prevented? What are the things that are important in the relationship on both sides that need to get sustained? So some really useful questions here to make this practical before a relationship begins are asking your client things like, in the context of this business relationship, what's important to you? So that I can serve you to a higher capacity, please share with me what's important to you. What is it? Is it trust? Is it communication? Is it honesty, transparency? Is it generosity, caring? You're wanting to elicit the values. This is called a values elicitation question. When you're asking someone what's important to you, you're actually eliciting what is at the deepest unconscious level, what is their core driver about what's important to them fundamentally. And so these are the key questions that you want to ask. Other questions you want to ask are things like, what would you want to never happen in this relationship? What would you want to never happen? Which is another way of saying, what are the deal breaker scenarios? What are the deal breaker scenarios that could possibly happen inside this relationship that would cause this relationship to fracture? Now, you're also going to find that the questions that you're asking here in a business relationship are exactly the same questions that you need to ask in a personal, intimate relationship, and ideally in a friendship as well, in a social relationship. It's the same premise. It's the same construct. It's finding out what's important to the other person, what's important to you, and finding a way so that both parties can honour what's important, such that the needs of both are taken care of. Now that is going to create a healthy relationship. And the question there that you want to ask is, what would you want to never happen? What's the deal breaker scenario? And this is a really powerful question, because what you're going to find out when you ask this question is you're going to elicit maybe some of the smaller nuances, some of the really maybe subtle but equally important things that you might have never picked up on or never predicted. For example, you might ask someone in a business relationship, you might be working with a client, or you might be working with your boss, and you'd say, what would you want to never happen? And they might say, I want you to make sure that you never, ever arrive at a session or arrive at work late. If you get to work late, the deal's off. It's like, interesting. Good to know that that is really, really important to the person, to the point where if that happens, well, the relationship would be finished. Now, in the context of an intimate relationship, you might ask that, and the answer might be, never lie to me. Or if you look at another girl, the relationship's over. Or if you cheat on me, the relationship's over. If you lie to me, that sort of thing. So this is powerful information to have awareness of, because it creates the structure and it creates the framework for longevity and trust and awareness and understanding inside a relationship. So other questions you can ask are, what are your preferences in terms of, if we were to go into business together, what are the types of things that you would like to see from me? So again, it's an extension of what's important to you, but what are your preferences? So for example, they're going to be things like, if we're working together, what are your preferences? Would you prefer that I call you or you call me? Would you prefer that I contact you via email or via phone? Would you prefer that the invoice gets sent 7 days in advance or 14 days in advance? These are the types of questions where you're actually honouring and acknowledging the preferences of the other person, so that you can do as much as you can to accommodate them and to work in with them. Now, this is not about bending over backwards and saying that the customer's always right, but what it is doing is finding out what are their preferences, what is important to them, so that I know how I can best meet their expectations. And importantly, if I can't meet their expectations, I need to create the awareness of that. So if they're telling me that they're expecting me to go above and beyond, and they're expecting to have extra time, or they're expecting to get answers from me after hours or something, and that's not covered in the agreement, that's probably an important thing to express up front, so that someone has awareness of that. Quite an important thing to express, because you've got to take into account someone's expectations. If they have expectations inside that relationship that don't get met, well, it's going to be another one of these factors that it really diminishes the quality of the relationship. And it's not because you've necessarily done anything wrong. You might have been doing everything right. You might have been going above and beyond, but because there's an unspoken expectation from the client or the customer's perspective, well, you might have been the best customer and best service provider of all time, but because there hasn't been a clarification of the expectations at the beginning, well, they might be disappointed. They might feel like you're not actually pulling your weight. They might feel like you're actually letting them down. And this is another thing. This is why the principle of radical honesty, or transparency and openness and honesty, is really important, because we need to be willing and able to express and explore all parts of our relationship, all parts of the agreement, to the point where we never are wanting to shy away from talking about anything. Now, there might be some parts of the business relationship that are uncomfortable. There are plenty of times where things come up in a relationship where it doesn't necessarily feel comfortable, because you might have to communicate something that doesn't necessarily feel good, because you might have to point to some truth that it might be confronting for the other person. You might have to pull someone up on something. You might have to acknowledge a shortcoming of your own. You might have to acknowledge something where you've dropped the ball. Now, either way, what we're talking about here is we're talking about the courageous pursuit of being truthful, of being self-expressed. And when you are truthful, when you are self-expressed, that creates the strongest conditions for creating trust in a relationship that you could ever imagine. And I think, as a fundamental business philosophy, you are always far better off embracing truth than comfort. I will always move towards prioritizing truth than comfort. Why is that? Well, I would much rather be honest with a client and a customer and share with them the way that reality actually is than tell them a white lie or try and convince them of something to make them feel good, because I don't believe that deceiving someone, I don't believe that making someone feel good at the expense of denying the truth is ever good business practice. I just don't think it's very good practice. And so what's required in order to embrace truth is you've got to create some really strong bonds, some really strong courage, and be really, really good at holding space should that relationship go through a little bit of turbulence. Now, as I said, this doesn't matter whether we're talking about a business relationship or an intimate relationship. It's the same thing fundamentally. It's establishing such a strong relationship so you know that anything can be expressed, anything that can be communicated between that relationship. Now, yeah, sometimes that brings up a lot of stuff for people. You might think, gee, how am I going to have a really deep and vulnerable communicative process between me and my client where I feel like I can talk about anything and everything? Now, yeah, that's going to bring up your stuff. That's potentially going to need you to help them move through their stuff. That's perhaps going to need you to be able to hold space and be the example of vulnerability and courage and openness. That's an example of where however you showing up in the relationship is going to set the standard and set the pace for the relationship. And for me, that's what I do in every relationship. I'm going to make sure that I am the one that's setting the standard for that relationship. And that's really important to me, because I know that if I'm in a relationship with someone, and that's what coaching is, that's what any service, any product is it is a relationship. When a client comes to me, they are buying a relationship. So I'm going to commit to them to create the strongest possible relationship that I can envisage. And it's the same with an intimate relationship. When I'm with a partner, I'm going to commit to them the strongest possible relationship I can create with them. Now, yes, not all relationships are going to be as strong as others, but I'm going to suggest that in business, if you value the business that's taking place inside that relationship, well, you want to strengthen the relationship. You want to do everything you can to cultivate the conditions inside that relationship, which is the ability to relate. You want to create conditions where the bond is so strong, where there's so much transparency, there is so much trust, that anything can be expressed inside that relationship openly and honestly. Now, to get to that point as a business owner, whatever service or product you're providing, yeah, you've got to do some work on yourself. We all have to do some work on ourselves. We need to be the ones that are going to be the walking, talking example of vulnerability and courage and transparency and connection and a willingness to get radically honest so that we can confront anything in that relationship. And when we set that standard incredibly high, our clients and our customers look at us as the example. They see us as the example and they respect that and they go, wow, okay, this person that I'm in business with, they've got this. Like, I get a sense that they can handle this. Not only can they handle this, but they are showing up like it matters. So I'm going to suggest that the stronger our relationships are in business, the more revenue we are going to attract, the more referrals we're going to get, the greater the success of our business, because people actually want to be in our presence. People trust us. People hold us in such a high regard, and they know that should there be any challenge that ever arises, they know that we will be the ones that will take responsibility for handling that, responsibility being nothing to do with blame, being the ability to respond. If people know that we are the ones that are going to take full responsibility for everything that takes place inside that relationship, then they're going to trust us. They're going to want to spend more money with us. They're going to want to create deeper solutions, and there's going to be greater longevity, and there's also going to be more referrals. So the strength of your relationships in business is going to determine the amount of revenue that you're going to create. That fundamentally is why relationships in business are so important. Now, this doesn't matter whether you're talking about customers, your clients, whether you're talking about co-workers, your employees, or potentially your boss or your managers or your superiors. This applies across the board. This is you developing such a level of self-trust and confidence in who you are and your ability to be self-expressed in each and every moment, to the point where it doesn't matter who you come into contact with, you can be a conduit of truth. You can hold space for someone in their darkest hour, in your darkest hour, and you can rely on yourself to be confident, to be trustworthy, to be able to handle whatever that moment brings into your awareness. Yes, that requires effort, that requires work, that requires the deep inner journey to master ourselves, to be self-expressed, and to have the courage to be vulnerable in each and every moment. So that is my take on what's the most important factors in developing relationships. When we develop strong relationships in business, well, I believe that's the key to unlocking deeper levels of success, and people sense it energetically. People will sense your confidence. People sense when you're telling the truth. People sense when you have their highest regard in mind. People sense when you care about them. They can feel it. They hear it in your tone of voice. They hear it in your body language. It might not be conscious. Most of the time it's unconscious. 93% of our communication takes place unconsciously. Most of it's by our body language and our tonality. It's only 7% are through the actual words that people hear. So the vast majority of our communication is happening unconsciously, and it's all energetic. People feel us. You will feel me. You'll feel the energy under the words that I'm sharing with you. It's less about the words and it's more about the energy I'm projecting from the place that I'm projecting it from. So that's also a major clue or a major area of work to be done, is if there's any incongruence in your confidence of the service or the work that you're delivering, that will also be communicated. That will also come out unconsciously. If you don't back yourself, if you don't believe in what you're doing, if you don't place a value upon it, if you're afraid of what someone else thinks of you, these are all things that are going to get conveyed unconsciously. And a client or a business partner or your boss, they might not tell you it, but they sense something unconsciously. They sense a lack of confidence. They sense something in you that's wavering. That is a lack of strength there. So we need to remind ourselves to build up the strength in ourselves about the value that we provide, the sense of confidence in who and what we are as a person, as a service provider, and stand behind that and really be congruent when we're communicating that. So that's another part of trust, is you've got to believe in what you do in order to communicate that to someone else. If you don't believe in your value, if you don't believe in your competency, it's very difficult to communicate that, and that's going to show in a relationship. So we've got to make sure that we are competent, we are confident, we believe in ourselves, we back ourselves, we see the value in what we're doing, we're standing up for the person's best interest, we're willing to embrace vulnerability, we're willing to be courageous, we're willing to share our truth, we're willing to be fully self-expressed. Now, when all those factors come together, that is relationship success. Not only intimate relationship, but also business relationship. No different. And obviously there's a little bit of difference there in terms of the intimacy, but you get my point. All these factors are contributing to developing trust. That's the core, that's the theme here. That's the glue that binds a relationship, is a sense of trust. And again, the definition of trust, or my definition of trust, is your willingness to capitalize on someone else's best interests. So, which is another way of saying you are going to be the one that's going to honor what's ever in their highest good, even when it's not in your highest good, even when it goes against the balance sheet, so to say, even when you could say it would be to your advantage to sell the product or sell the service to them. If you know it's not in their highest good, you just don't do it. And that's just good business. And when you adopt that principle, well, you've got nothing to worry about. In fact, not only have you got nothing to worry about, you've got everything to gain, because people sense that, people will refer you, people will come back again and again because they know you're a good operator. So that is what I believe are the keys to relationship success in business. And when we focus on these elements, well, there's going to be more business, there's going to be more clients, there's going to be more customers, there's going to be more success, more revenue. There's going to be a greater alignment in the types of people that we're attracting and doing business with. So I trust that helps, guys. Thank you for tuning in. Hey Ian, hey Livio, good to have you guys here. Thanks for tuning in, Monica. Thank you for being here, and I trust that was helpful. I look forward to seeing you guys again next Tuesday for Transformation Tuesday. Wishing you a beautiful week, guys. As always, lots of love. I'll see you guys soon. Bye for now.